What's up, you guys? Welcome to episode 430 of the Established to Run NBA podcast. I'm Mike Gallagher here with Drew Dinkmeyer to talk Eastern Conference tiers, and we just watched the Cleveland Cavaliers perhaps move up into a tier, into the top tier. We'll talk a lot about that, talk a lot about what we learned. We're going to be mostly talking about the Cavs, a little bit about the Thunders, because that game was so good. At least the first 47 minutes of it. Didn't have the great drama at the very end of it, but incredible basketball game last night for sure. Dink, how's it going? How great was that game last night?
Oh, so good, man. Honestly, I think we've been pretty blessed from an NBA marketing perspective in terms of the games that have been sort of the featured games that are pulling away from football attention a little bit, right? Like last night is the first big game that's away from all the football. You've got college football playoff stuff happening tonight and later this weekend. You've got NFL playoffs happening this weekend. And it was kind of a standalone sporting event, and it was fantastic. It was would have been the two best teams in the league to this point in the season, playing very high level basketball, especially the third quarter was just incredible offensive basketball against two very, very good defenses. And I thought we had great games on Christmas Day as well. So hopefully, I think the league is really in a very healthy place in terms of talent and in terms of how talent is dispersed across the league. I think the game is very interesting and entertaining these days. And hopefully, it will draw more people in that can fall in love with it, because I think a lot of the people who criticize it aren't as close to it anymore, and maybe were close to it before. But it was a great game, wonderful game. And yeah, Cavs fans, you got me. We're going to talk tiers in the Eastern Conference, and they definitely have jumped into that top tier with Boston. Just an absolutely fantastic performance by Cleveland last night.
For sure. And don't forget, ESPN flexed out Raptors Knicks to get this game. So imagine if they didn't do that, and the people who don't have League Pass would have just really missed out. Just truly one of the best games of the regular season that you could ask for. So what impressed you the most? I think is what matters in the short term. We'll talk about it what means long term. But after this game, there's a lot. I got a lot on my mind. I'm going to hand it to you first. What impressed you the most about this big Cavs win last night?
I think what impressed me the most is the biggest concern that I've had about the Cavs, big men in big games, is that they have not played to their size in big games historically. Specifically, that playoff series against the Knicks was really underwhelming in terms of their performance there. And even last year against Orlando, I thought it was a little bit underwhelming in terms of how they played with strength and physicality. OKC is not the biggest team, and I would love to see this matchup with Chet as well, with see how OKC responded in terms of against the double big lineups. But Jared Allen and Evan Mobley were dominant on the interior, and Isaiah Hartenstein's a very good defender and a very good player on the whole. And it looked often throughout the game as if Isaiah Hartenstein was playing 2-on-1, because they would get into this high-low action, and they were just really, really efficient. And Evan Mobley is playing through players now in a way that he did not before, especially on drives, finishing through contact at the rim. He's always had really good patience and decision-making. It's just been more like a lack of physicality, and I think he's gotten stronger, and he's playing through people now in a way he's starting to look more to me like what I envisioned when he was drafted, which is like, this guy could be the next kind of Kevin Garnett in terms of like his combination of skill, defensive instincts, and size and shooting capability. And he's starting to play more and more like that. So those two being able to play effectively together against a team that has often made teams have to play smaller because of the pressure that they put on bigs with swarming down and clamping down. They were just in rhythm the whole night and making quick decisions. I mean, Mobley, every time he got the ball kind of in the middle of the Oklahoma City defense, it was quick decisions out to the corner to Max Strus, or to the dunker spot to Jared Allen, or through contact and up towards the rim. It was quick decision making. So the combination of the way those two bigs played together in this game was far and away the most impressive thing for me for Cleveland.
Yeah, we see so many Mobley to Allen lobs nowadays. It's so good. So I think that's takeaway number one is like, man, Jared Allen, you talked about that Knicks series. Remember that quote? He was like, hey, the lights were too bright. And then we saw them doing to what they did to the Thunder last night. Like, the Knicks kept killing them on the glass over and over and over again. And as someone who bet OKC last night, I was like, oh my God, they just keep beating them off the boards, which is a big bugaboo for OKC, but they capitalized on it in a big, big way. But yeah, obviously Jaren Allen was just, I mean, he got the post-game interview. He changed the game from a defensive standpoint too. So I think that's the headline. Just Mobley's well-rounded offensive game has been a story since the first day of the media day before the preseason started. And it's just come to fruition in such a beautiful, beautiful way with the way they score. I mean, to score 129 on OKC is unheard of when they were ready to play, and they played pretty good defense, just really good shot making. My other big takeaway is like, cash in your Kenny Atkinson Coach of the Year tickets. Like, it's over, man. I mean, this dude, he pushed all the right buttons. That challenge at the end of the game with Donovan pushing off on Dort, I thought that was big. I heard a stat that he's 13 of 16 on challenges this year. And then just the game plan was great. Just from when they're on offense, just we knew that the OKC was going to switch, and they leaned so much into attacking SGA, and that may have gotten him into foul trouble, which I think really may have swung the game a little bit to keep the free throw rate down. I know you were talking about that in our Slack, to win the free throw game against OKC 27-17. That was really big. And just overall the game plan, just like playing Max Strus at the right times with the right combinations, and then obviously the depth was really the last point. I mean, you got just output out of Max Strus. Ty Jerome, a former Thunder player, killed them. You get a terrible Donovan Mitchell game, and literally everyone on the team was productive. Maybe George Niang wasn't. Isaac Okoro had some good runs. Their bench was really, really good in this game. And even LeVert guarded SGA really well overall. So got production up and down the roster. That's really takeaway 3. So the bigs, the coaching, and the depth, which has been, again, Kenny Atkinson's consistent points all year, are like, we're going to use our depth, and you really couldn't have played it any better than the way he did.
Yeah. First note, do you think it's as simple to say if Evan Mobley is the Cavs' best player, they are a very legitimate title contender in terms of one of the top teams? Like, if Evan Mobley is their best player, and that's not, I don't mean that to say Donovan Mitchell playing poorly. I mean that to say if Evan Mobley is playing so well that he's clearly the best player on the team, I think they're a title contender. And I think that's what we've essentially seen this year. Is for much of the year, I think Mobley's kind of been their best player. Do you agree there?
Yeah. I mean, so you're saying if Donovan stays at this level and Mobley starts.
Yeah, I'm saying Donovan. We know what we're getting from Donovan. Donovan didn't play well last night in a very difficult matchup, but just generally, we know what we're getting from Donovan.
Yep.
If Evan Mobley ascends beyond Donovan, that's the tipping point for me that this is a legitimate title contender. If Donovan Mitchell is their best player in the playoffs, I think they're going to get run down by somebody. I think they need Mobley to be their best player in the playoffs to win the title.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And just the added 3-point shooting, and just his ability to create on offense when you can pressure and blitz Donovan Mitchell. And we didn't see. That's why they kind of stalled out on offense all the time. And JB Bickerstaff got buried all the time because they ran the same 3 things. And the coaches knew against them hey, blitz Donovan, make him play 4 and 3, and they're not going to be able to have enough shooting and scoring and playmaking and all that stuff. So, Mobley's defense is fantastic, but his growth on offense is besides Kenny, I mean, if you had to take a bigger picture, that's number 1, right? Well, I guess
100%.
I would say 1 and 2, or Garland's rebound too is such a game changer. But I think
I still think Mobley's more important. I mean, it just long-term trajectory of this franchise and this organization. If Evan Mobley is on the path of Kevin Garnett, Tim Duncan, those types, that is game changing. And I think we are now starting to see that he might be on that path. And I don't want to get too far ahead of it because those guys are just all timers, but we're starting to see that. Second, I did want to note the depth point that you talked about. I thought they did a good job highlighting this on the broadcast as well, but both of these teams, everybody on the team knows their role and knows kind of what they're supposed to do. And I thought you saw that perfectly in this game from Cleveland with guys who might not have always known this to be their roles. And you talked about Karis LeVert defensively. This was something that was talked about from training camp in terms of Kenny Atkinson. We want Karis LeVert to be active defensively, to ball hawk, to pressure, and to get up in people and use his size and length to be disruptive defensively. That is not how Karis LeVert has been categorized as his time in the league. He's been categorized more as, maybe a secondary offensive scorer or a lead sixth man or different things like that. The focus has been on the offense. And Karis LeVert no longer has the focal point on the offense as much. It's on the defensive side. Max Strus has always been classified as a shooter. So I think his categorization has been kind of held firm in the same. Ty Jerome has had a hard time kind of finding his place in the league where he would be categorized. And I think they're finding that with Ty Jerome, they trust him in a way offensively to break down things in pick and roll and create for himself and for others in a way that has really unlocked his game. And we talked about this about a month ago in terms of Ty Jerome's ascent this year has been so valuable and impressive. Isaac Okoro knows his role, that he's just going to be out there to hawk defensively. If he's making his shots, great, he'll play more. If he's not making his shots, we're moving on. We got other guys. And everybody seems to be cool with the roles that they're in. And I think winning helps all of that. But yeah, this team is very, very deep. 10 guys that I think are all legitimate rotation players that all have intertwining skill sets that you can easily trim that to 8 based for a playoff rotation based on opponent, based on who's got a hot hand, different things like that. You have enough depth to get through the course of the regular season with the depth on this roster. Kenny Atkinson's been able to manage minutes because of the depth of this roster. Donovan Mitchell had a quote talking about how he feels fresher than he's felt at game 34, 35 at any point in the last few seasons because of the workload that he's been able to manage during this point of the season. And we talked about this in our own internal Slack maybe a week ago when talking about Kenny Atkinson Coach of the Year stuff. And I think a lot of the credit is going to Kenny Atkinson for the Cavs' ascension this year. And I think he's deserving of a lot of that credit. But I also think Mobley's leap is a big part of the reason. And then I think health is a big part of the reason. But you might be able to turn some of that health credit right back to Kenny Atkinson in terms of the depth of the rotations and the way that they're playing and the depth of this team and getting the best out of all these guys. Because last year in total, they had about 77% of games played from their starters. This year, they're well over 90%. Like everybody's playing almost every game, other than the Max Strus injury to start the season, which if you counted him as a starter, that would shift the numbers more. But that's the only injury that they've really dealt with. They've been exceptionally healthy. And maybe that's in part due to Kenny Atkinson playing deeper rotations and forcing less, having a more diversified offense that's forcing less wear and tear on two guys in particular in the guards as it had in the past with Bickerstaff's offenses.
And just two more guys I want to close on, and kind of just highlighting SGA, who scored 31 but shot the ball 27 times. Talked about him being pressured on defense. Dean Wade was really good on him. He's been just awesome night in, night out. They don't lose with him in the lineup ever. And then with Max Strus, one thing that was interesting too was they played 17 zone possessions last night, and that was really good for them. 0.77 points per 100 possessions. And I mean, Max Strus was a pretty big part of that. In the way that he kind of was almost the centerpiece of their zone defense. So shout out Max Strus, who, as you noted, is a great shooter, but he could defend. He goes out there, he doesn't really give up stuff. So got that Miami culture in him, which is a bit of a slight. Sorry, Miami, but yeah. Anything else you want to end on? We'll talk about OKC another day. I mean, there's a lot to talk about, but if you want to give OKC a shot or anything.
So on the positive side for OKC, Cleveland shot 42% from three. They outscored you by 4 3-pointers made, so 12 points there, and by 5 points at the free throw line. So they outscored you by 17 points on non-twos. And this was a competitive game going down the stretch. In the turnover battle, they won. That's how they force extra possessions, right? They only turn the ball over. I guess they turned the ball over 13 times and Cleveland 15 times, but they tend to win that battle. That's the positive side for OKC. You can say, hey, shooting variance was on their side. We lost the 3-point range. That's usually when you're going to lose. We were without Chet Holmgren. We were on their home court. Like, those are all things you can say for OKC that would still paint a prettier picture for OKC. The one negative for OKC is we saw this a little bit in the Dallas series as well. They don't seem to have great answers against zone. And I don't know if they need another. I don't know if like Chet will open that up in terms of having another big that can spread the floor and shoot over the zone a little bit more. But J-Dub isn't super confident in those shots, doesn't take them often in river. He's more of kind of like an off the dribble shooter than like kind of a catch and shoot shooter to me. And then their other guys don't seem like Dort seems to need a lot of time to set up for his shot. So they don't seem super confident against zone. And I wonder if they need if that's the one thing that could be the bugaboo on this team, a team that we think is like so well positioned to be a championship level team. I just wonder if they need like one more scoring piece. That's the one thing that kind of came across to me is like there's so much weight on SGA's shoulders in these games to like break down. And when against these zone defenses, he's got multiple hands kind of crashing down on him at times that can also force them into 2-point heavy shot diets as well. So those were kind of my concerns on OKC. I don't know if you saw those or felt similarly.
Yeah, I don't really have any concerns, man. I mean, I thought they just didn't have their A game. I thought the Cavs played really well. I just looked up their zone efficiencies actually way up from last year, 0.1 points per 100 possessions. So they're doing, I mean, they're just better. They're a better team. Like, of course it's up. So,
yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. I don't really have anything I thought they played a really good game. I just thought the Cavs just played better, honestly.
Yeah.
So just a great game overall. Which brings us to the point here. We both said they're in the top tier. Are they ahead of Boston in the top tier right now?
I think some of this stuff is the nuance of basketball is matchups can kind of like make things like I think OKC is a much better matchup for Cleveland than it is for Boston. So we just happened to see OKC play each of these two teams, and Boston really got clamped down, right? 27 points and a half. Cleveland had 2 quarters that they scored less than 27 points, and that was 26 and 25 against OKC's defense. So Cleveland didn't have any of the same problems offensively that Boston had against Oklahoma City. I think a lot of that has to do with Cleveland's size and their ability to play double big and play kind of, I mean, those Evan, Mobley and Allen were playing big. Horford and Porzingis don't play big. So I think that's a big difference, like that it might be clouding kind of the assessment. I still think Boston versus Cleveland. I think Boston is better suited. That's like better matchup for Boston than it is for Cleveland, because Boston, while they struggle to play big offensively, they still can play big defensively in terms of their ability to limit offensive rebounding, their ability to limit points in the paint, and those types of things. And then in terms of Boston, they have more waves and wings of guard defenders to slow down Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland, as OKC did last night, but OKC struggled to contain the bigs. And I think Boston I would still have ahead of Cleveland, but in some ways I think Cleveland is a tougher matchup for OKC right now without Chet Holmgren. I think that would change with Chet Holmgren than Boston is right now. And so I think we just saw kind of that dichotomy. Obviously the difference of playing at home versus Boston versus playing on the road in Cleveland as well for OKC. But yeah, I would still have Boston ahead of Cleveland right now.
Yeah, it's like so close though. I mean, they're like playing record pace offense and just they're winning night in, night out. The only game they lost in the last like month and a half was a back-to-back. I don't know. It's close, man. Like I think I still say Boston just because we saw them do it. But This is crazy, man. This is one of the best. I mean, this is like Warriors level, Kevin Durant level of like, just incredible basketball. Like you go in and you expect them to just produce offensively every single night. So I don't know. It's close though. It's close.
It's pretty remarkable. A couple of things that you just like as you said that, I was just thinking of how remarkable this must feel to be a Cleveland Cavaliers fan right now, in the sense that if you like zoom out for the history of the Cleveland Cavaliers, in the 80s and 90s, they were like a very competitive franchise that was like kind of like a poor man's version of this team, right? It was like it didn't have the like big star, but it had a lot of depth to it. Those teams had Brad Daugherty, Mark Price, Craig Elo, Larry Nance, like really, really good teams that were giving the Eastern Conference challenges, but couldn't really get over the hump in the playoffs. And then they were a team that was like really bad for a while. And then LeBron came, and the fan base was like put all of their hopes on LeBron to like change the nature of this. And it was like a one-man show trying to carry and scale the mountain. And then they eventually did when LeBron came back, right? And then it was like, oh God, once LeBron goes, how are we ever gonna, like, we're a bad franchise again. How are we ever gonna get back? And here we are, not that far away from when LeBron left. And it's rebuilt in a way that looks really structurally sound for the future. And that must be just a really, incredible way for Cavs fans. That was one thought that I had. And then the second was, we went through this period in basketball where we were so focused on wings and how, like, you needed to get elite wings because the game was changing, the game was playing smaller. And we saw it with like Tatum and Brown, and everybody was like, that's the duo you need. And obviously it has been the duo that you needed, those types of wing players. But we were obsessed with like Paul George and all these guys. And we had gotten de-emphasized from the big man. And then we got Jokic and Embiid, and we started to get this dominance. And now we're getting Wemby, and now we're getting Mobley, and we had Giannis. And now it's like, oh yeah, size really does still matter quite a bit in the NBA. And size with mobility and versatility, that's the thing that really, really is hard to overcome. And so we went from this period where a lot of teams were trying to play like positionally big because they were afraid of like getting played small off the floor. And now it's like, no, the two big guys can still win too if they've got positional versatility in terms of their ability to guard out on the perimeter as well. And so these just freaks of human beings, Wemby, Mobley, these guys are, it's like the new era is this mobile big man that can, compete at all levels on the floor. It's just really fun to watch the evolution of the game the last 10, 20 years.
Yeah, it's always trying to be a step ahead for sure. So let's talk about the next tier. A big gap on this tier with these two teams, Boston and Cleveland, looking almost. I mean, they're like, what are the chances that Boston or Cleveland isn't coming out of the East? Honestly, like 85%. I feel like it's such a gap, maybe higher.
Yeah, I think that's probably fair. I mean, the thing that works against the other competitors is they most likely have to go through both of them teams,
exactly.
Right? So just from a math standpoint, the math starts to get pretty bleak. If you had them just have to get through one of them, I would say like, yeah, I think maybe it's more like 75%. But when they have to get through both of them, I think there's only two teams that could potentially do that, and I don't feel like it's very likely that either of them can go through both. So I would say it's upwards of 90+% you would be expecting a Boston or a Cleveland representing the East in the finals, assuming full health and everything.
Yep. So with that, our second tier that we have two kind of firmly in there, with the New York Knicks snapping their losing streak last night in a non-ESPN game that almost was, beating the Raptors a little closer than I thought. And then the Bucks, really good game, national TV game. Their defense has been significantly better lately. Offense is sputtering a little bit. Middleton dealing with the tendonitis in his ankles, some concerns there. And then kind of on the border on tier 2, tier 3, we've got Orlando. We're getting Powell back either today or most likely tomorrow against the Bucks. So potentially a tier 2 matchup that could swing things there. So of those three teams, which one do you think has? You mentioned a couple teams could threaten these two top guys. Which of those two do you think it is?
I think it's still the Knicks. I've been a big Knicks believer this season. Obviously, the concern on the Knicks is they're going to have so many miles on their tires compared to everybody else in this range because of the way that they play in the regular season, the depth issues that they have on the roster. But I still feel like the Knicks' best games are on the tier of Boston and Cleveland. They don't play those best games consistently enough to be in that tier. But when they are at their best, I think they play at that tier level. I think Milwaukee, when they're at their best, I think they're still a little bit behind Boston and Cleveland at their best, is kind of the way that I would put it. But I think Milwaukee can find that tier level as well. Orlando, I don't think at this point can. Orlando, I think they've got to really muck up games in a big way. It's hard to muck up games against Boston and Cleveland. Those two teams are just so skilled offensively, and they can defend and just make things really, really hard. So to see Orlando kind of get through a series against either of those teams is pretty difficult for me to envision at this point. I think they need another step forward offensively to be able to do that. I just think what we're seeing now in the NBA is obviously the old mantra of defense wins championships is still really important. You have to defend, but the offensive level that you have to hit to be able to overcome playoff level defenses is so high now, and I don't think Orlando can hit that barrier. So I would even consider them more of like a tier of their own in tier 3, but it's really tough to figure out because we just haven't seen them play very much this year with Paolo and Franz together, and now Suggs is hurt, and so they're limping through. So it could be a lack of imagination on my part that's leading to this feeling as well, just that we haven't seen them kind of all healthy playing together very much this year.
Yeah, we did see Orlando beat Boston when they were shorthanded late December for Boston's second worst offensive game of the season. But yeah, I'm with you. Like, I just don't think their high end outcome is strong enough. So I agree. But then again, the Bucks got major depth issues. How much can Giannis produce? Giannis's playmaking has been really, really awesome. That's been a nice thing to see over the last couple of games here, which has been consistent throughout his career. But I think if you told me like tippy top outcomes, like the Knicks have the best, but then the Bucks aren't far behind. Like if Dame is peak Dame, that's who's a better like number 2? I guess 1-2. Which 1-2 would you rather have? Giannis and Dame and Cat or Brunson?
Definitely Giannis and Dame.
Yeah, I agree.
I'd rather have Giannis and Dame. It's just like that's where it ends for Milwaukee.
Yeah,
the next 3 I'm probably giving to New York. So that's the challenge for Milwaukee is the lack of depth.
Yeah, for sure. So pretty much in agreement there. The next tier is 2 different ways to look at this next tier. We've got the Pacers and the 76ers. If the 76ers were missing Embiid again, they would be in tier 2, like no doubt about it. But they are missing Embiid again, and Paul George is hurt again. That's really the whole story. I mean, if you told me, you can't even imagine that. It's not a realistic world to live in that you expect the Sixers to be healthy. So it's really that simple. The Pacers are playing great. Their first unit since they really lost Aaron Nesmith hasn't missed him at all. They've been really playing really good defense. We kind of joked about them being like, not deserving to be in the Eastern Conference Finals, but they're really hitting their stride after really, really struggling for call it the first third of the season. So of the 2, do you have, there's just 2 different stories to tell. But any thoughts on the Pacers and Sixers?
Sixers, when I was just kind of reminiscing about that Cleveland fan base, kind of the opposite feeling here with the Sixers. The vibes are just so bad. Just like, I feel like there's a weight on this franchise right now of, I don't know. It almost feels like a franchise that like is the example of someone who spends all their time on social media. Like they've just been like overexposed to each other. Everybody's angry with each other. Like nobody's happy. It's a slog to get through. Nobody's feeling good. That's what it looks like watching them play basketball. Like it doesn't look joyful at all. There's no moments that it looks joyful. Even when Embiid's been healthy this year, it looks like resentful. It doesn't look joyful. And so, maybe I'm getting a little woo-woo on my basketball takes here, but I feel like I don't know if we're going to get a stretch of basketball that inspires enough confidence to believe that Philadelphia will have enough confidence in themselves to get through the really difficult task of beating some of these high-end teams. This feels more like I don't know. It feels like a team that knows they're not good enough. Or knows they can't be healthy enough. Like it feels like a team that, like sometimes I felt this at the end of the Bulls era with Derrick Rose, where they just kept butting their heads against the wall against the Miami Heat with LeBron James and Dwayne Wade. That at some point they just realized, like, man, I don't think we're good enough, and like the belief like started to turn off a little bit quicker. And that's kind of what it feels like with Philadelphia and Joel. They like the whole city feels like they just don't believe in the situation anymore. And so, yeah, it's ugly. I don't have confidence that we're going to get a stretch of basketball that gets them to play with that level of confidence that would be required to win a series against these teams. Like I could see them, like you just said with Orlando beat Boston. I can see these teams win a couple of games against a Boston or a Cleveland, but I can't see them win a series right now. In Indiana, just a really good story for a team that has a franchise that's never believed in tanking, a franchise that's always believed in kind of putting their best foot forward and trying to compete. They've turned around this franchise with the trade of Tyrese Halliburton. Bringing in Pascal Siakam has taken them to another level. They've drafted pretty well. They're a fun story. I think the combination of Pascal and Halliburton being your best players just has like a very, very low ceiling associated with it. And unfortunately for them, the East has gotten a lot better in terms of ceiling. They kind of took advantage of last year's situation. I think that was probably the peak. They need to find another they need to find another star level player, I think, for them to be able to send. That they're going to have to draft and develop that most likely.
Yeah, I think Mathurin's taking a step forward, and that'll be an interesting question when Neesmith is back from his severe ankle sprain. If they keep him in there, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it for sure. But yeah, I think they're playing really well. Halliburton looks to be healthy again, and they've got depth, man. Nembhard's been pretty good.
Yeah,
Shepard makes impact all the time. We saw Thomas Bryant. I mean, really, made a huge impact last night against the Bulls. But yeah, I like where they're at. And just one last point on the Sixers. We talk about them not being healthy. I mean, they still got 13 games of Embiid, and he has a 104.4 offensive rating on the court. The only players worse with 29 minutes or more per game are all Wizards. Yeah, so it hasn't been good. Like, they've been like okay with Embiid. So it's just such an uphill climb that there's so much working against them. The next tier, the tier that is like, okay, maybe they could avoid the play-in and be a top 6 seed. It's a pretty tight tier, and it's really the last 3 teams we're going to talk about are the red hot Detroit Pistons, the Hawks. I mean, man, if not for that Cavs game, I mean, poor Trey. Trey has one of the biggest shots of the season. It hits a half-court heave after another huge shot by Kellen Sexton before that. I was losing watching this game. And then Miami Heat. They're kind of the last tier we're going to talk about here. Who's at the top? Is it Detroit? I mean, Detroit's playing freaking lights out. Another blowout win last night. Shout out to Pistons minus 8.5. Are they at the top of the tier, and can they push like the Pacers as this up and coming positive story right now?
Yeah, I think they can. And after years of Cade slander on this podcast from me, you're going to get nothing but Cade love with the way he's playing basketball this year. More well-rounded offensive game in terms of being able to score at all 3 levels, more efficient this year, improving as a distributor in terms of running the offense, and then defensively competing a little bit more on that end as well. And they got to Cade's credit, to give him the benefit of the doubt, they did not have floor spacing in previous years, and that always makes it tougher to be an efficient offensive player and take good shots and different things like that. They went out and they emphasized getting floor spacing on the team. Tobias Harris, Tim Hardaway Jr., Malik Beasley, and that has really helped Cade. The loss of Jaden Ivey certainly hurts in terms of having that secondary creation that they really need. But if it just, I think it hurts more as like the insurance plan on if something happens to Cade, because Cade's playing an awful lot right now. Mm-hmm. He doesn't have a history of being able to play like huge amounts of games during the course of the season. He has kind of a lengthy injury history. So that's my biggest concern with Detroit. But if Cade's healthy, yeah, I think they're probably at the top of this tier. Them in Atlanta right now, the vibes couldn't be more different between those 2 teams and then Miami. I think there's a lot of joy and enthusiasm and optimism on Detroit and Atlanta in terms of teams that are like finally seeing some fruits of the labor of kind of a rebuild here. Atlanta kind of doing a quick turnaround with the DeJounte Murray trade, Risa Shea looking like a solid number 1 pick in kind of a down class. I think both those teams have a lot of reasons to be optimistic. Trey looks like he's more himself playing without DeJounte Murray kind of next to him this year. And so Jalen Johnson taking the really big step forward, obviously, for Atlanta as well. A lot of positivity around these 2 teams in terms of their growth trajectory, and then the exact opposite in terms of the vibes on the Miami Heat.
Yeah, and then Jalen Duren's been playing a little bit better. Their defense has been awesome. Actually, in 2025, only a 5-game sample. They're first in defense. Of course, they played Orlando, Charlotte, Minnesota, Portland, Brooklyn. Yeah. But still first. You got to give them some credit for that. But yeah, I'm buying, man. Asar Thompson, I think, is going to be a guy that can make their impact defense and change where they were really getting killed on the ball. And then, as you mentioned, the spacing, and they've got enough depth, really, where they kind of need it up front. And all that. So yeah, I'm kind of buying. I think that they're almost into in the next tier with the Pacers. It's kind of crazy.
I agree.
What a quick turnaround.
I agree. I bet them a few weeks ago at plus 400 to make the playoffs in the East, and feeling really good about that right now. I think in some ways, sliding Asar into the starting lineup over Jaden Ivey makes them much more complete offensively. Like I think Jaden's issues defensively like that, this allows them to get out and run a little bit more. I know Jaden's the guy who will run, but they're able to get more stops, and Asar's a rebound and go guy. Asar can create turnovers and different things like that. So I think that version of the starting lineup with Cade, Asar, Tobias, Shooter, Tim Hardaway Jr., and then Jalen Duren, I think is like a little bit more well-rounded as an offensive unit. If something happens to Cade, that's where they'll really miss Jaden, and maybe the second unit offense will miss the having Jaden on there, and Jaden had taken a nice step forward this year. But I think Ausar fits a little bit better around the pieces that they have in that starting lineup now. So I'm not expecting a huge drop off in the absence of Ivy for Detroit.
Yeah. And to that point, the last 5 games, basically since Ivy went down, they're playing in the half court just 71% of the time, which is first in that span. And to put that number into context, the Memphis on the bigger part of the sample is at 76%. So they are really running up and down the court, and it's led to some better offense, which was an issue for them. So yeah, playing the right way. We talked about how great Kenny Atkinson was and how much better he's been than Bickerstaff, but like how much better has Bickerstaff been than Monty Williams?
Yeah.
It's kind of crazy how kind of shook out. Poor Monty. Down bad. Anything else you want to hit? I mean, I don't think there's much. Trey's been Trey. Trey's having a great season.
I think we need to hit on the Miami Heat. And what do we think the ultimate, end game of this saga with Jimmy Butler is? Because we've seen the power moves from Pat Riley trying to say we're not going to trade Jimmy Butler. We've seen Jimmy Butler say, the hell you aren't going to trade me. I'm going to stand in the corner and take one-legged jumpers. And then, the Heat are like, okay, we're going to suspend you. And Jimmy's like, well, we're going to, appeal that suspension and file a grievance. And so like these two are going back and forth, and two pretty stubborn individuals, and Pat Riley and Jimmy Butler kind of at the head of this. And all the while, Spo and, is cast of Lost Boys are trying to figure out their way through a Western Conference road trip. They get a nice win in Golden State after a very disappointing loss in Sacramento. They've been playing pretty poor on the whole. Bam's had a down season in a big way. In terms of the trade, if they don't make the playoffs, the implications for the future picks are really significant here. So there's not a lot of motivation to move Jimmy just for the sake of moving Jimmy. It's a weaker Eastern Conference, so you could still potentially get away with like finding their way there. And I think what Jimmy's doing is making him less compelling to other teams to go and acquire. So I think the only situation that you're probably going to find, right, is like something that has two teams that are down bad and super desperate, and they're just trying to reshuffle deck chairs on that Titanic, and that looks like Phoenix. But Bradley Beal's got total control of where he can go, and I don't think Miami wants Bradley Beal because they don't want the money, because they want the money off the books with Jimmy Butler. So I don't know how this works. I think ultimately we're going to get this situation where a bunch of unhappy couples end up staying together and trying to figure it out for the rest of the season. I don't know if Jimmy's actually going to end up getting traded, because I think he's like, in a way, sabotaging what teams might be interested in him with how he's behaving. So do you think Jimmy ultimately gets moved? What do you think is the end result here?
I think so. I mean, I think Jimmy's so stubborn that he'll just sit out and not get paid. Like that's just kind of how he is. So I think the most interesting trade that I heard was a kind of Jimmy Butler, Brandon Ingram centric trade, where Brandon Ingram, and you wouldn't bring Jimmy back to New Orleans, but you'd send him somewhere else in like a multi-team trade, which makes a lot of sense. Their numbers don't match up exactly, so there would have to be more pieces involved. And like, there's no chance they would trade Herb Jones or anything like that. It'd be like salary filler. But yeah, I think he gets traded, man. I mean, this is just so untenable. And this team's just, we see it night in, night out. They overperform all the time, but can you do that every single night and do it enough when the East is deeper than we thought? We joked about earlier this year. The Sixers, you can make a case the Sixers talking about resting Embiid was a bet that the Eastern Conference is going to be really weak. Guess what? It's kind of not. As we talk about the Hawks, the Pistons, really just the Hawks and the Pistons being competitive is why the Sixers aren't even in top 10.
Yeah.
So they're
the Bulls too.
The Bulls too.
Yeah, the Bulls too. And not that they want to be, but they are.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. So yeah, I don't know. I think that they've got to do something for sure. Like I think it's over. Like the way that this is going to end is just can't do it. So I think he'll get traded. I don't really have any great ideas. We're seeing the reports that he doesn't go to Memphis, all that. So it's tough to get.
It's just so much harder to trade these guys now in the new collective bargaining agreement. Like that's one of the challenges, is like it becomes really, really difficult to manage your cap and trade these guys, because like in Miami's position, they want the cap space. I think they'd rather have the cap space than any of the players that people are floating around that make the same amount of money as Jimmy Butler. So how are you going to get them cap space and picks for Jimmy Butler? Like that's really hard for like contending teams don't have those contracts to ship off generally. The ones that do, like, Golden State there's so much chatter out of Golden State not being interested in Jimmy, and that coming from the players, it seems like Steph and Dre are the ones funneling that to the media, that they're not super interested in having Jimmy around. So I don't know. I think there's a decent chance. I think it's like 65-35 that he gets traded. I think there's a decent chance that you end up in this weird situation where either Jimmy is like told to sit home the rest of the season, or like, because I think Miami, like the problem is Miami in terms of the hierarchy of what is out there for them, holding Jimmy and just getting him off the books is pretty compelling. That's like one of the top options in terms of what they would want to have happen. So it's not like the old CBA where you could just trade him for expiring contracts and kind of like move on. There's not a lot of teams that have those types of expiring contracts to trade for him that would want him, because they want the money off their books, because the CBA has everything so tight. So I think I think it's more likely than not that he gets traded, but I think there's a decent chance he does not get traded, simply because Miami, in terms of the pecking order of things that they want, the salary relief of him coming off is important.
Yeah, for sure. And then, as you kind of hinted at there, their draft pick is lottery protected, going to who else but the Oklahoma City Thunder.
Of course.
But yeah, so yeah, I'm with you. This is going to be fun to watch. Miami's just, they've got some young pieces though, man. I've enjoyed watching Jovic. Khalil Weir has been really fun. Jaime Hawkins playing a lot better recently. I'm a Haywood Highsmith guy. I like how he defends. So yeah, they'll be fun. They'll be, again, extremely annoying to project for minutes. Perhaps my most hated thing every day.
Yep.
But yeah, they'll be around. They'll definitely be in the plan for sure. All right. Anything else to mention to kind of wrap up here?
As always, appreciate your guys' support. Those of you tuning into the audio version, you can leave a rating or review on your podcast provider, Spotify, iTunes, wherever you're listening to this. If you're interested in checking out the video version, you can go to our YouTube page, EstablishTheRun.com, Establish the Run on YouTube, Establish the Run NBA. Jeez, we're struggling here. Establish the Run NBA on YouTube. If you're interested in checking out any of our premium products, you can go to establishtheRun.com/NBA-subscribe for more details on our premium product offerings. We did create a new product offering on the prop side of things. So this is a little bit of a change. But starting January 1st, we created the full stat projections product, and that is just access to our full statistical detailed projections. Those previously were housed under the DFS product, but we figured out over time that it made more sense to align that with the pricing, along with the people that were using those full statistical detailed projections to bet on their own, to price that as kind of a premium props related product. So now we have one DFS product. That DFS product includes all DFS projections, all shows, content from Mike Gallagher, myself, NBA office hours, matchups column, live streams covering the DFS slates. And then we've got a full projections detail package that includes the prize picks, underdog tables, the full statistical detail projections. And then we've got the props package that includes official plays from the ETR team, along with those full statistical detailed projections. So 3 different products that you can read more about on establishtheRun.com/NBA-subscribe if you have more for more information on our NBA premium product offerings.
Yeah, and we're adding some more betting stuff throughout the shows and the content. I was 3-0 on spread bets going into OKC, Hanami, and L. So those have been pretty fun to mix into. So yeah, check us out over at establishtheRun.com/NBA. Appreciate you guys for listening, and we'll catch you guys next time.